Each morning, we hold out the chalice of our being. We hold it out to be filled with the graces of life that abound. Air to breathe and food to eat, companions to love, beauty to behold, art to cherish, causes to serve. They come in ritual procession, these gifts of life, whether we deserve them, we cannot know or say. They're poured out for us, and our task is to hold steady the chalice of our being. We carry the chalice wherever we go, either meandering aimlessly or with destination in eye. We share its abundance if we have any sense, reminding others as we remind ourselves of the contents of the chalice we do not deserve. Water from living streams fills it, if only we hold it out faithfully. We give back, if we can, something of ourselves. Some love, some beauty, some grace, some gift. We give back in gratitude, if we can, something like what is poured into our chalice of being for those who abide with us and those who will follow. Every morning, we hold out the chalice of our being to receive, to carry, and to give back. If you have a chalice or a candle at home, I invite you to take it now and to light it with me as we say in unison these words of affirmation of our liberal faith. We kindle this flame to illumine the world we seek. In the search for truth, may we be just. In the search for justice, may we be loving. And in loving, may we find peace. It is good to see all of you this morning, even remotely. We long to be together again. The day will come, friends. It will come. This is a rather lighthearted but thoughtful reading from the Unitarian minister Meg Barnhouse. One night, I heard an old man say, "I had a wasted life." I began wondering what it would take for me to say that I had wasted my life. I could have lived a life where I only watched TV and cleaned my house, and then I'd lie on my deathbed and remember my life while wailing and gnashing my teeth in that clean, clean, clean house. I could have been a company woman, making six figures and working 60 hours a week, too busy for my family or my church, my garden, and taking small comfort in remembering that I had never missed a day of work. As I lie on my deathbed, what do I want to remember? Right now, my relationship with my father is painful. I asked him 4 or 5 years ago to stop quoting the Bible to me because it made me feel like throwing up and screaming, and he stopped immediately. Even though the Bible is his reference, his rule, and his delight, we continue to talk every 2 or 3 months, but he has less and less to say. I don't know what I want to do about it. Part of me wants to give up. It would be a relief to surround myself only with people who are like-minded. I don't want to remember being cut off from my father because he doesn't talk to me the way I'd like him to talk to me. I don't want to look back on drifting away from my family because they are devoted Christians, while I'm Christian in ethics and pagan in practice. In The Wheel of Life, people told Elizabeth Kubler-Ross that when they went toward the light, they were shown how all of our lives are intertwined. Our thoughts and actions affect the universe like ripples in a pond. People reported hearing the question, "What service have you rendered?" The light asked them to consider whether they had made the highest and best choices in life and whether they had learned the ultimate lesson of unconditional love. I wish I hadn't read that passage. I'm not great at unconditional love. I try, but lots of people annoy me. Even when I have the time, attention, and patience to love unconditionally, I'm not sure what that involves. I know it doesn't mean being sweet and dewy-eyed and telling people that they're wonderful no matter what. I know that unconditional love involves disagreement and challenge. So how do I know in each situation what unconditional love involves? What would a life well spent be? What would it look like for a regular, somewhat irresponsible, but often charming person without a lot of moral fortitude like myself? I heard one woman say that she just wanted to live long enough to grow every kind of tulip that there was. Another friend said she wanted to live long enough to see her daughter struggle with a 17-year-old just like her. What would satisfy me? I'll be glad if I've raised my children with honesty and love, if I've made music with other people, if I've seen beauty and loved it, if I've learned how to get along with my relatives, if I've made a soul connection with spirit, friends, and lovers, and if I've claimed my right to tell the truth as I see it. Oh, and I want to be wonderful, that's all. The meditation this morning is on the words of Micah, the Hebrew prophet. What does the Lord require of thee? But to do justice and to love mercy and to walk humbly with thy God. It sounds simple. But what about all of those things that the Lord doesn't require? What about all of those things that, literally speaking, we ourselves don't even require? Things like buying books or enjoying a good bottle of wine or just renting a movie on YouTube, or maybe even upgrading to more leg room on the coach flight. What about all those little indulgences and amenities that we treat ourselves to? Does the Lord have an opinion about all that? What would Jesus do, or Gandhi? If ye would be perfect, Christ said, go and sell all that you have and give it to the poor. But doesn't God also just want us to have a little bit of fun now and then? St. Augustine is said to have prayed, Lord, make me good, but not just yet. And we likewise pray, not for moral or spiritual perfection, but to cherish and enjoy each day as we can, to try to be a little kinder, and perhaps to leave the world in some small way improved for our passing here. As Thoreau said, to elevate the quality of each day. This is the highest of arts. So suppose you had an opportunity to save a life, to save another human being. Say you could save your brother's life, your sister's life. Say it wouldn't be that hard to do. Most of us wouldn't hesitate. We know that we would do the right thing. But that choice wasn't so easy. Wasn't so easy almost a lifetime ago for Ronald Herrick. Ronald, on the 23rd of December in 1954, became the first person in history to donate one of his kidneys to save his brother Richard. Back in those days, taking out a kidney was an untried and experimental procedure. Now it's all done laparoscopically. But back then, doctors actually had to break a rib to take the organ out of the body. And many physicians were opposed to the idea of intentionally inflicting injury on a healthy patient, even if it meant saving another person's life. The precept of do no harm is central to the Hippocratic Oath. In the popular press and the newspapers, Dr. Joseph Murray, the physician who performed the surgery at Boston's Peter Bent Brigham Hospital, and who eventually won a Nobel Prize for his work, he was compared to Dr. Frankenstein, this whole idea of taking a body part out of one person and putting it into another. This was considered to be something rather ghoulish and gruesome and unnatural. And even Dr. Murray considered the operation something of a long shot. Transplantation appeared to hold out hope only in the very rarest of circumstances for the tiny number of cases like those of Ronald and Richard, who just happened to be identical twins. Anti-rejection drugs were still a thing of the future, so it was by no means clear to Ronald, a healthy 23-year-old who'd just been discharged from the army, or to his spitting image, Richard, who'd been released from the Coast Guard, but was at that point in the hospital dying of kidney disease. It was not clear at all that their rather unusual swap would help doctors or patients down the line. Ronald passed away not too many years ago at the ripe old age of 78. But before his demise, he was interviewed by National Public Radio. He told them that it was a hard decision to make. But when his brother Richard tried to call the whole thing off the night before the surgery, he held firm, he insisted. And his brother went on to live another 8 years. And together, the two of them unleashed a medical revolution that would save hundreds of thousands of lives over the next few decades. So was it worth it? In retrospect, there's no doubt that Ronald made the right decision medically and morally, but at the time, nobody would have blamed him if he decided not to donate a kidney, and many would have praised him for his caution and his good sense. So suppose that you had the opportunity to save a life. Suppose that with very little sacrifice on your part, you could prevent another person from dying. Would you be willing to give a kidney to a brother or a sister or a child or even a total stranger? Most doctors consider The first, entirely commendable and normal, when my mother gave me a kidney 40 years ago. Nobody blinked an eye or questioned her motives. Transplants by that time had become almost routine, and the success rate for the recipient was very high and the risk for the donor very low. At the same time, tens of thousands of people were on waiting lists, condemned to spend a good chunk of every week hooked up to a dialysis machine. And yet, the notion of donating an organ to save the life of someone who was unrelated was still considered odd, peculiar, suspect, to say the least. A paper that was published in Seminars in Psychiatry in 1971 said that most doctors looked on it as impulsive and repugnant. So it wasn't until 1999 that the first non-directed kidney donation took place. Joyce Roush, who was herself a nurse with the Indiana Organ Procurement Program, person who understood both the risks or lack of risks very well. She proposed herself to Dr. Lloyd Ratner, one of the leading transplant surgeons at Johns Hopkins. He was at first reluctant to discuss it. He said, "Give me a call, we'll consider it later." He never expected to hear back from her, but she called him again and again. She would not be put off. Joyce said she felt like she'd been tapped on the shoulder by God. After a battery of psychological tests and bioethical consultations, she was finally allowed to donate one of her healthy organs to a 13-year-old boy, and Joyce and Christopher are both alive and well today. And not many, but a few people every year follow in her footsteps. One of them was Zell Kravinsky. Mr. Kravinsky was an odd case. He'd already given away a financial fortune, amassing a $45 million real estate empire. He'd begun to be troubled by the disparity between his own great wealth and the poverty of those who had so little. He had to talk his wife into it. But as a psychiatrist, she was interested in healthcare. So in very short order, gift by gift, they were able to give away almost everything that they owned. They gave $6 million to the Centers for Disease Control, $30 million to support a school for public health at Ohio State University. Kravinsky had to back off his idea of total divestment. His wife did insist that he set up a small trust fund for her and the two children. But in the space of just a couple of years, Kravinsky took his total assets down from millions of dollars to a quite modest level: a small home with a large mortgage, 2 old minivans, and about $80,000 in stocks and cash. He'd gone from being a tycoon to being a rather grungy middle-class guy, meanwhile setting records for philanthropy. But for Zell Kravinsky, this was still not enough. He knew that if he wanted to, he could do much more. Kravinsky wasn't tapped on the shoulder by God so much as driven by a mathematical calculus. He was raised in a Jewish family committed to socialism and left-wing politics, and he'd worked as a teacher in a Philadelphia ghetto before he discovered his inborn aptitude for making money. Interest rates and amortizations and depreciation tables, these were things that came naturally to him. Numbers and ratios were things that he understood. So when he read an article in the Wall Street Journal that explained how a kidney donor had only a 1 in 4,000 chance of dying from giving up an organ, Kowalski understood immediately that this was like buying a US savings bond. The risk was almost zero, but unlike government bonds, the dividend, the payout, would be enormous. Some lucky person would get an entirely new life. The logic was irresistible, at least to an algorithmic type of mind. Moral calculus is a phrase that comes from the ethical framework known as utilitarianism. The right thing to do, the right thing in any circumstance, according to this code, is to produce the greatest good for the greatest number, maximize happiness. Ought to be our guiding principle, not just maximizing our own happiness or augmenting the happiness of our friends or family, but adding to the felicity of human beings in general, or maybe even to the happiness of all sentient creatures, at least if we follow the arguments of Peter Singer, the Australian philosopher who now teaches at Princeton, who's the most prominent spokesperson for this viewpoint. In an essay titled Famine, Affluence, and Morality, Singer set up a puzzle called The Shallow Pond and the Envelope. He asks us to imagine a small child who's fallen into a shallow pool and who is in danger of drowning. Most of us would agree that we have some obligation to rescue the youngster, even if it would mean getting our clothes wet or our shoes dirty, and it would be callous to put a higher price on footwear than on the life of an innocent child. But now, Singer says, imagine getting that envelope from Oxfam or UNICEF, the kind that comes in our mailbox regularly every month. Ignoring the envelope would be morally equivalent to ignoring the drowning child, Singer claims. To sharpen this dilemma, he proposes the hypothetical case of Bob. Bob is close to retirement. He's invested most of his savings in a rare and valuable old car, a Bugatti. And in addition to the pleasure he gets from driving and taking care of his car, Bob knows that its rising market value will mean that he'll always be able to sell it and live comfortably in retirement. Well, one day Bob is out for a drive in his Bugatti and he parks it near the end of a railway siding and goes for a walk up the track. As he does so, he sees that there is a runaway train with no one on board hurtling down the line. And far down the track, he sees that there's a small child playing who's likely to be killed by this runaway locomotive. He cannot stop the train. The child is too far away to warn of the danger, but there is a switch. He can throw the switch that will divert the train away from the child and down the track where his Bugatti is parked. And then no one dies, but the Bugatti is destroyed. And thinking of his joy in owning the car and the financial security that it represents, Bob hesitates. What should he do? What would you do? Most of the people in this congregation are incredibly altruistic. They raise funds to pay off other people's medical debts. They cooperate to shelter refugee families. They provide meals at the men's shelter and keep the little food pantry filled with wholesome food for their neighbors, and they reach for their wallets when earthquakes strike distant lands. But few of us would go as far as Professor Singer, who recommends that whatever we possess above the bare necessities ought to be given to those in desperate need. Singer says that the solution to world hunger is simple. If all of us living in North America would give away everything, all our income above $30,000 or $40,000 a year, whatever it is, to keep heat and a roof over our heads, then with that money, the 25,000 people who die of hunger every day could all be fed. And more than most, Singer actually practices what he preaches. Last year, he received an award called the Berggruen Prize for Philanthropy and Culture. It's an award that's given annually to thinkers whose ideas are changing the world. And the philosopher announced that he would give away the entire $1 million in prize money. He would give all of that away, with half going to organizations campaigning against factory farming, working to end animal suffering, and half going toward charities associated with The Life You Can Save, a nonprofit that he founded to identify those aid organizations that are doing the most to squeeze every penny to the last drop to end human misery. In addition to all of these other good works, he's working for the development of a global health exchange so that potential organ donors in the West can be matched with recipients living in poorer countries and vice versa. And yet still, even the admirable Peter Singer hasn't volunteered to give away a kidney. There's more to life than logic, after all. Zell Kravinsky considered giving all his organs away with a liver and 2 kidneys and a perfectly good heart. He could save several lives in exchange for his one. The arithmetic makes perfect sense in a goofy kind of way. But when he started giving away his fortune, he realized that he couldn't give his organs away too, because the other kids at school who went to class with his own, they would say that his father was a freak and he didn't want to be a bad dad. He wanted to give his clothes away too, but he realized that if he was naked, the investment bankers that he needed to talk to wouldn't let him in the front door. So he does own a suit, a used suit that he bought for $20 at a thrift store. Kravinsky's parents were furious at him when he gave away his money. And his marriage took a lot of strain. Moral decisions can't always be analyzed mathematically any more than relationships or families can. And yet still, there's a young Black woman named Donnell Reed who was trapped on dialysis for 8 years before Kravinsky set her free, giving her back her health and freedom. And she's convinced that her benefactor is a hero. But that's not how Zell Kravinsky sees himself. He thinks of himself as just an ordinary person trying to figure out how to do the right thing. He says that nobody should have 2 houses when there are so many people who are homeless. Why should he have 2 kidneys when there are thousands of people dying just to get one? He's been criticized in the press by journalists who question his motives, who accuse him of grandstanding, call him a lunatic. But then Ronald Herrick, the first kidney donor, was criticized in the papers too, along with the surgeon who did the operation. So is Zell Kravinsky a crank? or a saint or a man ahead of his time. I'm sure there must be more to a life well spent than just giving stuff away. But you tell me, how good do we have to be? Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Gary. What a huge question. As we reflect on Gary's words, we need to remember the ways in which our donations to this congregation make a difference. They support our ministers, our assistants, our board in keeping services available. They help us reach out to the men's shelter. They help us provide housing for those in great need through the activities of our charitable giving committee. In this time of needs, your gifts are truly needed. Our treasurer, Joe Mazza, wishes to express his deep appreciation for your continued forwarding of your pledges and gifts. Remember that your pledges can be sent to Universal Congregation of Taos at P.O. Box 510 in Taos.
Thank you all for coming this morning. I hope you'll stay for conversation and grab a cup of coffee afterwards. We'll have a social hour. And now go in peace, speak the truth, give thanks each day, care for your body. It's a wonderful gift. Honor the earth, honor her creatures. They are alive like you are. Live simply, be of service, be guided by your faith and not your fear. And now we extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of caring, or the fire of commitment. These we carry with us until we're together again.